Hello friends, I'm Daniel Nesbitt, and in this video, I finally get to start the series I have always wanted to see on YouTube, and I really hope you're excited to see this one as well. I have been inspired over the last year or so by the Let's Play videos on YouTube, and if you're not familiar, it's basically just watching people play video games, and I thought, hey, wouldn't that be cool to apply the same concept to designing a font? So we're going to try that, and unlike my first video, which was on designing an icon font, this really isn't going to be too much of a step-by-step tutorial per se. It's more going to be entertainment. But that said, I hope you do learn a few things from this series. We're going to be going through, and my plan is to design a sans serif typeface. Yeah, I know, there's a lot of need in the world for another sans serif, but you know what? Why not? Let's go for one. So I'm going to keep things pretty simple, and really, I'm not going off of any specific sketch or anything like that. I'm just kind of making this up on the fly a little bit, but I think we'll get somewhere. We're pretty good at the end of this by the end of this series. So we're just going to dive right in. And one of the things that I like to do, I should probably jump back for a second and mention, is that in this one today, we're going to be focusing on the cap H, the cap O, the lowercase o, and the lowercase n. Those are typically some good characters to start with because there's a lot of information that we can get from this that really informs how the font is going to look moving forward. Now, I've done a little bit of practice ahead of time, so it would be not fair to say that I haven't tried things out a little bit. So one of the things that I know for sure is I'm looking for something about that wide, and I'm looking for about 85 points in thickness for the stems on, or the vertical stems on my H. As far as this goes, I'm gonna aim for, well, let's try 70 and see where that goes. So I've got 85 and I've got 70. And one of the things that I'm doing as I'm going here is I'm really keeping an eye on my preview down at the very bottom of the screen. You'll notice I have it kind of crunched down pretty far here. My goal for this is that I do want this to be a text face, so this should be able to really hold up at smaller font sizes. The other thing that I'm really probably going to push for here is, shamefully, I do have to say that I really do like taller X heights in fonts. And I'm not ashamed to admit that. But yeah, we'll see where this goes. It's we're just kind of making things up a little bit as we go. So as I was talking through that, you probably noticed that I got the H done. And this seems pretty decent. We're about 560 points wide, 700 tall. I'm just kind of going with the defaults and glyphs here. I don't think that's too bad of a place to start. It looks, I mean, width-wise, it doesn't look too terrible. And I'm just kind of throwing in some side bearings. I'm actually going to kind of bump those out a little bit more, I think. So we'll go something like that. So keeping 560 in mind, we've got the O next. And for this one, similar to what I did for the H in drawing the stems there, I'm just going to start with a circle here. Now there are some decisions that I will have to make as far as how this looks. I do know that I'm probably going to want, well, I'm going to kind of guess maybe 10 points of overshoot. We'll see. Actually, let's make it 15 in both. And I'm just looking at the top and bottom directions here. Now, as far as the width, we were at 560 for the H, 560 points wide. I do want my O's to be a little bit wider than that. So, let's see, how wide do we want that? This may be okay. I'm going to maybe stick with Actually, I may go with like 600. Yeah, let's try 660. Why not? We'll make it a little bit of a wider font. So we'll go with that. And I'm also going to go and I'm going to kind of adjust this curve a little bit. I am a huge fan of the fit curve option in glyphs here. It's just a great way to kind of go and really dial in how some of these curves are feeling. I don't really know that I want much of a square feel to these shapes, but I definitely do want it to feel kind of like a natural round shape that you might draw with a pen on a piece of paper. And I really want to avoid getting too much into making this look like it was just drawn with the oval shape. I don't think I need to go too far out of the way as far as making this super oval shaped. I am just going to kind of poke around a little bit though, because I think we can kind of make this somewhat nice. We'll go with there for now. So that's part one for the outer portion of the O. Now I'm going to go through and set the inner bit as well. And one thing I do, yes, it's probably annoying to those of you who know your way around glyphs a little bit, I do rely on my transform menu quite a bit. I've just never really gotten a good feel for using the scale tool, pressing S on your keyboard if you're following along at home. I've found that I just have better luck keeping things in order going this route instead. So we'll do that. And another thing I'm doing here as well is you'll notice usually you want your rounder shapes to have a little bit of a thicker stroke width to it than your vertical shapes. It's just that optical illusion of making them not look thinner than they actually are. And one approach, at least the approach that I have, is I like to really get my point set up at the same, the vertical and the horizontal width and height here. And the reason that I like doing this is it kind of gives me a good point to start from. This isn't where I want to finish at, but it just, rather than guessing or relying on a mathematical formula, because, well, full disclosure, I am actually terrible at math. I just like to be able to start from a position like this, and I usually just rely on my eye a little bit to really dial things home. So what I did there, just to kind of keep up with things again, is I moved the outer circle in, made a copy of it, and got my my two strokes set up here. And then really all I'm doing is I'm just going and doing a shortcut for, I believe it is the correct path direction. So glyphs automatically figured out that I'm trying to punch a hole through there, which is fantastic when things work out the way I want it to. And there we go. We've got a basic O and an H there. If I zoom back out, that's one thing that you'll probably see me doing quite a bit here. I really just want to make sure that things are looking or reading well. This may end up being a little bit on the thin side for a body face. I'm actually kind of thinking it will be, but one of the things that we'll get into later on down the road is instances. And I'm okay if I'm a little on the thin side right now, because I will be able to go back in and kind of beef this up between the thin version and the thick version. I'm going to kind of avoid saying like a light face and a bold face right now, but it gives me that opportunity to kind of dial in. So usually, depending on the font that I'm designing, I may either start on the thin side of things or on the thick side of things, with that knowledge that I can dial things in a little bit later to my liking. So now that I've got that set, I'm just going to go ahead and we'll start with the lowercase n. And the reason that I'm starting with the n instead of the O is I just tend to think a little bit better in squares than I do in circles. There's certainly no harm in going the opposite way. But one of the things to know about lowercase letters, if you're not familiar working in this space, is that they're actually a little bit thinner than their uppercase counterparts. So I'm going to start by backing off by about 50 points in width here. So instead of 560, we're now at 510 points of width. And I'm just going to kind of loosely start putting things together here. Again, when I get into this mode or this point of my process, we're getting a lot more into things like trial and error. But I'm okay with that. That's kind of honestly how I roll. So I'm just going to kind of draw out a few points here, make sure that everything's connecting up the way I want. And this isn't really going to look all that fancy to start. We're definitely not going to be going with something like this. I'm going to go and I'm going to give myself some handles here on each side of this. And all I'm doing is I'm just option clicking along this part of the line. And when I do that, I get the two handles there. Personally, I like to hold shift then and drag them so that they snap into a 90 or 45 degree angle, in this case a 90 degree angle, and that kind of gets us going. So right now I'm just keeping, again, the 70 and the 85. We'll address this in a moment because the lowercase letters do tend to look a little bit on the thicker side of things, and that's okay for now. Like I said, we're kind of feeling out shapes. We're kind of feeling out where this is going. There will be a lot of tweaking as I move on here. So we're just going to roll with the 70 for now, knowing that I'll be changing that. The other thing that I'm also going through and doing here is just aligning my points. I do like to kind of keep things fairly even, if I can, at least starting out. It makes things a little bit easier when I have points that are snapping to where they should be snapping to. And it looks like we're doing okay on those. So what I'm doing down here as well is I'm also snapping the curve to the upper portion here of my vertical, my right vertical stem. And on the other side, I'm actually doing the opposite. I'm bringing it down so that it can kind of taper into that side. And then over here for the left, I'm actually just going to grab both of these. Again, kind of do the same thing, just allowing that to taper. The other part here is just going to kind of do its thing inside. So I think we have that pretty well set up. And again, I'm just going to kind of get everything a bit lined up here. I can't really say that there's a rhyme or reason to a lot of the things that I do. Sometimes what it comes down to for me is does it look good? And that's the most amazing and yet frustrating part of type design is how much of this can just come down to subjective things, because outside of some technical details, you might not always get things looking the way you want, or they might not come out the way you're thinking. And I found that to especially be true when I was starting out. You look at so many amazing typefaces out there, and it looks so effortless. You look at Helvetica, for example, and how some of those characters are drawn. And especially when you're starting out, it would just seem so obvious. Well, why wouldn't you come up with those solutions, or you would make those decisions? It just seems like it would be so obvious. And there's such a difference between looking at those things and critiquing those things, and then actually coming back and drawing it for yourself. You realize how difficult, especially for some of these designers, that it must have been to really try and get some of these shapes right. It's not always as easy as you would think it would be. Another thing that I do note that I kind of struggle with a little bit, and you'll kind of see me going back and forth here a little bit, is where curves go from the curve itself into the straight portion of a stroke. Again, when you're drawing, for example, you probably don't even think about this if you're to draw this lowercase n, for example, that your wrist kind of would naturally taper that off and into that straight stroke. But on a computer program, it's not quite that way. It's a lot more like an engineering program sometimes, where it curves, and then at some point it stops deciding to be a curve and then goes into a straight line. You get a little bit of a bump there. And that's something that you see actually quite a bit on a lot of beginners' typefaces. It's something that they kind of forget to really acknowledge, or maybe they don't even know to acknowledge those kinds of things. But what I've noticed is it's a small detail that really makes a big difference when you're constructing a typeface that's going to look professional. Now, early on in this process here, I can't say that I'm going to be super happy with where the shape of this N is going right now. The thing that I am keeping in mind is that I will be continually refining this and making it look a little bit more to my liking. But for the time being, I think we can kind of make this work here a little bit, at least for the sake of getting these 4 letters started. And like I said, as we go through this design process a little bit more, we'll start making some more informed decisions as we start seeing how this plays out in other scenarios, perhaps in a lowercase h, or different pieces of the face start coming alive. This may help me come back and change my mind about things. I just leave some of this just open to interpretation and not really pigeonhole myself right away into trying to make a perfect letter or a perfect shape. So taking my own advice, I think we're going to leave that N there for now. Like I said, this does have a ways to go, but we're kind of starting to really get that shape that I'm looking for. This is getting a little bit better. Again, still a little bit to mess around with here, but you know what? It's looking like a lowercase n, and really that's the goal, right? So yes, like I said, I could play with this forever, and there's still things that I see wrong with that. So we're going to jump over next to the lowercase o, and for the lowercase o, well, you probably guessed about how easy that was going to be to do. I am going to grab the shoulder of my lowercase n, though, and that's what we're going to be aiming for here for sizing the height of this. And again, I'm using my dirty trick here. Sometimes this doesn't work out. In this case, it looks like I might have run into that as well. Doesn't exactly line up. Now, for one point, I'm not going to lose sleep over this being perfectly even all the way around. I think that'll do. Yeah, I think that should be all right. The other thing that I'm going to do as well, while I've got this component here, is I'm actually going to go and I'm going to line up the height here. So this isn't just a matter of scaling things. This is also a matter of making sure that I'm uniformly keeping my stroke widths consistent. And it's where designers get cranky about stretching type. I'm sure you've probably seen that before, especially if you have an interest in typefaces. You'll notice right away how many people stretch type, and of course, many people will get very upset about that. I am one of those people, but it's something that a lot of beginners, maybe they don't think about, or they think that it looks cool, and I'm trying to avoid that here as much as I can. But you'll notice, like right now, I'm stretching this O, but this isn't the be-all, end-all where I'm expecting this to be the final shape, or that I'm happy with this. Obviously, I don't want to stretch my type into weird, funky shapes, but I do like to kind of push and pull things around a little bit. Like I said at the beginning, it's a messy process, but we'll figure this out. And you can kind of see one nice feature about glyphs that I actually like over vector programs like Illustrator or things like that is how I can grab all of these anchors and curves and uniformly kind of push and pull them together. So what I've done here, as you probably noticed while I was yakking, I've got my overshoots in place, which we're just going to leave those at 15 points for now. That may or may not be too much. I'm not exactly sure. The other thing that I've gone ahead and done here is I've made sure that the stroke widths are uniform. I'm at 70 and 85 in both directions. Now, the last thing that I want to take a look at, because this does kind of catch up with me sometimes, is the diagonal points here. Because one thing I want to make sure is that this doesn't really have like a funky shape to it, or that the stroke width may feel too thick or thin in places. And again, this, like, we're getting into optical illusion stuff. So for example, here on the left-hand side of my lowercase o, I pulled in the top and the bottom Bezier curves a little bit. I actually pulled them towards the outside, and I'm thinning up this diagonal part of my stroke here. I think originally, yeah, we were around 82, and now I'm bringing this down to 80. So it's just a couple points difference. But when I go back to the shaded shape here, you'll notice it's a world of difference, because it actually looks a little bit more uniform, even though technically speaking on the right-hand side, that is a mathematically correct taper. It just doesn't look right. It's just those little things that help. So yeah, that brings us back down to 80, which I think that's a little bit better. It looks a little bit nicer. And then the last thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go ahead and adjust my side bearings. And that's kind of the big thing that I really work on, especially this early in the game, is making sure that those side bearings are working and looking well. So where I'm at right now, I'm pretty happy, generally speaking, with where we're going. This isn't exactly the be-all, end-all of where I want to be. Obviously, there's a lot of tweaking to go. There's different design decisions that I've yet to make. But I would say for the start of this, we're at a good starting point. And I have a hunch that I'm going to continue tweaking out some of these shapes. But hey, getting oh no, I mean, I think we're in a pretty good place. So if you like what you're seeing here, if you're enjoying this and you want to see more of the series, be sure to hit the like and the subscribe buttons so that you know when my next video is coming out. And speaking of that next video, I think what we'll do is we'll continue working on these 4 letters here, and also start looking into how they are going to expand into other shapes. So as always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.